Welcome to this episode of the Speedster Rebuild. We're fixing a differential. After Charlie and I took our test drive, things weren't quite right. The Ruckstell wouldn't shift into direct. It works in low, but not in high. It makes kind of a...
Alright, so here we are driving the T under normal circumstances. We're in Ruckstell low right now. But when I go to shift into Ruckstell high, we get that noise. So as soon as we go back into Ruckstell low, we're back in distance again.
Yeah, you gotta pick up the camera after you're done with it. Inside of a Ruckstell, there is a complicated set of gears. In some cases, 20 horsepower with a stock ratio doesn't give you the gearing that you need to pull hills. The Ruckstell was an aftermarket accessory that was commonly put into Ford vehicles to give you another underdrive without going into the Ford low speed. See, Fords only had two speeds. They had a high and a low ratio inside the transmission. This would then split those gears to give you an intermediate ratio to pull hills at a high speed. What is happening is that there's a sliding shaft that fits down inside of this portion of the Ruckstell. And in order to lock it into high gear, that shaft has to interact with the splines that are on the inside of this collar. They have to interact with the splines that are on the outside or in the inside diameter of this plate. They also have to interact with the splines that are on this plate. So when all those things lock together, it basically makes it so this whole differential piece spins in one locked up configuration. What I'm expecting is when I tear into that differential, I'm going to find that the inside diameter of this plate is going to be worn. I'll probably find that the teeth that intersect this plate, as well as the one on the axle housing, are worn over and basically not usable. So that's what I'm dealing with. It's going to require a full teardown of that differential to find those bad parts. So if you have a Ruckstell and you're looking to rebuild one, the Model T Ford Club of America sells a Ruckstell rebuild book, and it's really very good. I've probably rebuilt 30 Ruckstells in my tenure, and I tend to lean towards the looser end of all the clearances and guidelines that they lay out because, well, these cars aren't daily drivers anymore, and I look for serviceability and function over precision in this case. When everything is tight, it just doesn't make it so they shift nicely often. When things are just a little bit looser, it shifts nicely, works more better, if that's even a word, which I don't think it is, but we'll go with it. It's dark under here, so you're not going to be able to see very much. But while we have this car up in the air, I'm going to take that opportunity to disconnect the U-joint, disconnect all the brake rods. At that point, lower it back down to the ground and swap places with my touring car. Way to put everything. So if you look inside, we've got all sorts of glittery stuff, which is to be expected. I mean, the differential was grinding something fierce. More of a like a silver color, more than a brass color. So that's metal shavings. These differentials did have like a Babbitt thrust washer on this side of the housing, ball bearing on this side of the housing, so maybe that Babbitt thrust washer is starting to go bad. There's an awful lot of wear on that ring gear. As you can see, that ring gear is shot. The ring gear being shot doesn't really surprise me because the pinion gear is shot as well. See all the chunks of metal hanging off of that thing? No good. The bearing is very loose. This spool should be tight with this bearing conversion on there. And as a result, so with it being loose like that, it's not holding the drive shaft in its location. So there's a lot of slop in the drive shaft, which is probably why that pinion is totally shot, why the ring gear is shot, why the differential makes just a ton of noise in general. So, a lot of parts to replace here. Tell you what, I've taken apart a lot of Ruckstells, and this one's messed up, just to say the least. So, I'm just going to come out and say I'm not a big fan of modern axle bearing conversions on these differentials. I'm also not a fan of the modern pinion bearing conversions on these differentials because they all have the same problem, is they're really poorly engineered and they end up failing. So the drive shaft bearing, as you saw, junk. And then the axle shaft bearings, the bearings themselves were okay, but their ball bearings is what they're converted to. And unfortunately, they're just rough. Like, it sounds like just dirt has been ground through those things. And though they hadn't failed yet, they had seized on the axles, and getting the axles apart was very, very frustrating. I've never had a stock differential fight as hard as this one coming apart because of the aftermarket components that were put into it. With that being said, get that rant just out of the way. As far as what I found wrong, exactly what I thought had gone wrong. There's that brass thrust plate, and as you can see inside of there, we got brass shavings. This face here, all the teeth are worn off the inside of it where the gear intersects it. Also, this is the gear set that the sliding gear intersects, and it's rounded off on the ends there. Here's the sliding gear, and these teeth look pretty, these teeth here look pretty good. This has showed some signs of wear on them. The teeth are also all bent. They're all kind of curved on the end of this. They got some issues there, so definitely going to replace this guy. Probably will need to replace this one or find another good used end plate. This, I think, it's not worn that bad. It's steel. They don't, I mean, it definitely has some wear on it, but not too bad. But what is really kind of disheartening and expected because of how bad the ring gear was and the pinion, but I've never taken apart a Ruckstell before that is just caked, and I mean caked in like mud. I mean, that's the grease and goo that's coming out of the internals of this thing. So I'm guessing it was either run with some heavy gear lube at some time, or it just ran out of gear lube and was run for quite a while without any lubrication. But all the internal parts are just caked in very heavy, bad grease or oil. And then the other odd thing I've never seen on a ring gear is they have studs that they've put into the ring gear, and they did at least drill the holes to safety wire, and the nuts that they had, they drilled little tiny holes into the nuts to safety wire. So that aspect was pretty good. These bolts are a special bolt that is particular to Ruckstells, so we'll be replacing all the ring gear bolts. A couple of them were actually loose as well, which doesn't surprise me, but the ring gear, all the face and the inside and the outside of the teeth are all pitted. So new ring gear, new pinion set, new thrust plates, and I think we can get this thing back together again. It is what it is. When you open up one of these differentials after been sitting for close to 100 years, or even for that matter, it's been in use, but these parts are 100 years old, and things don't last forever, so got to rebuild them. Part 2 of this differential rebuild, I'm going to go ahead and clean up all the parts, get it all put back together again, stick it back underneath the car, and we'll take it for another drive. If you enjoyed this video, I really appreciate it if you would give me a like and a subscribe. It feeds the algorithm, lets other people know that there's Model T content out there that's worth watching. So, with that being said, you have a good one, and I will catch you on part 2. Take it easy.